where literacy evolves with technology and language proficiency. This is the Multiliterate Mind podcast with Dr. Liza Trejo and Marnina Falk Colman.
Hello and welcome to the Multiliterate Mind. I am Marnina Falk Colman and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Liza Trejo.
Hi, Marnina.
Hi, Liza. Good to be back in the studio.
Yes, always a pleasure.
So together, for those new, we are exploring how proficiency, multiliteracy, and human connection are evolving in an AI-driven world. We're so excited to bring our guest, Robyn Marcak, on today. Robyn will be signing her responses, and you'll hear her interpreter, Sherry Swan, voicing for her.
Welcome to the podcast, Robyn. We are so glad to have you join us.
I'm so glad to be here.
So before we get started, let us give our listeners a bit of background about you.
So Robyn Marcak has spent nearly 30 years teaching American Sign Language and holds degrees in education from California State University, Northridge, and Deaf Education from Lamar University. She currently coordinates ASL curriculum to support students transferring to four-year universities and serves as a state, national, and global evaluator for ASL assessments, including her role as an ASL rater manager with Avant Assessments. A longtime advocate for deaf education, she has held leadership roles in several professional organizations and was the first deaf professor at her institution to receive a prestigious faculty award. Marcak is passionate about helping students see ASL not only as a language, but as a gateway to deeper connection with deaf culture and community. In this podcast, we talk about multiliteracy as meaning-making across languages and modes. ASL challenges many of our assumptions about literacy, and we're excited to learn from you today.
Go ahead. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, it's our pleasure completely. And we've been so looking forward to this episode and learning from you. So can you start by telling us about your journey as a deaf individual and as an educator and how ASL has shaped your life?
So I'm deaf, born to a hearing family. My mother has German measles, and that's how I became deaf. So on this journey, my father was actually in the military. We moved around a lot. So I have had a lot of different experiences, deaf ed programs, mainstream programs. So with both of those in mind, I actually went to Japan as well. I had no language at all until I was 15 years old.
Wow.
Which, at that time I could read English and write somewhat, and I had a teacher that worked with me one-on-one, several hours a day in Japan. Ironically, I didn't learn English actually in the US. I learned English and writing in Japan.
Oh,
Wow.
So, yeah, so I picked it up there, developed, my skills with English at that time. And then that led me to becoming a teacher for the deaf, for teaching deaf students or students that are hearing that are wanting to learn. So.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit more about the experience of when you say you had no language until the age of 15, do you mean no ASL or no English?
So my upbringing, it's a visual gesture language. I had pictures that were shown to me. And so there was no verbiage, no grammar, nothing like that. So I just kind of went by pictures. So I didn't have anything prior to that. So I'll give you an example. I'd say probably when I was 13, my mother bought a globe. And she, before she, in Japan. So there was, like I said, there was no grammatical structure there. So anyway, so to be able to communicate with me, she bought a toy like an airplane
Uh-huh.
at, just at a store. And so that was the airplane. She was showing it like flying over to, like, here's the Earth, the globe was the Earth, and then flying over that. And then your head would kind of move, and I would go, or uh-huh. And she'd go, So she would do the yes, no with her head. And that's how I knew it was right or it wasn't, to make sure I understood visually the concept of what she was trying to tell me. That's just like a little example of
Yeah.
something that she would show me. So I learned, my dad, like I said, was in the military. So
Mhm.
that we moved around a lot, but that was one of the examples
Okay.
to, to kind of teach me.
Okay. And then so you learned American Sign Language before you learned English?
I learned visual gesturing, ASL, yes, before English.
Okay.
It's a
And
visual
how
language.
did you get into that? How did you start learning that?
Through my classmates who were deaf. I was in a deaf ed
Oh,
program. I interacted with the deaf and just picked it up along the way.
okay. And then I know that you said you started learning your English in Japan. How exactly did that happen? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. The teacher actually started, at the very basic level, if you will, writing a word like, oh, like UN, like
Uh-huh.
un. And so I would put down, IYU, and then and then we do we practice the English, from the beginning. I would just put down the beginning, like I run or I ran, and then you would add the s if that was needed, or they or she, so just the very basics of the English language. I started out just like any other student would, and kind of just added on the way. So
Okay.
added more along the way.
All right. Very interesting.
And I want to know a little bit for our listeners who may not know much about ASL. What do you wish they understood about it as a full language, as someone who was raised with ASL and learned ASL and also now teaches it? What do you wish our listeners who are new to the concept of ASL, don't know it much, what do you wish they understood about it?
So I would say I would want them to understand the whole concept.
Mhm.
ASL is a visual gesture language. It's not a verbatim, a word by word, like the
Mhm.
English language would.
Mhm.
Like hearing people would say they, the voice inflection, they would use facial expressions is what we would do. That's part of the language. That's part of the culture. The
Mm.
classifiers, all of those things are part of the ASL language. So the true meaning and content of what's being said is more of like a 3D conversation.
And it's considered also, I know I hear it, it's not just a translation of English, it's its own language.
Yes, ASL is a true language. Yes.
Because I wanted to clarify, I think that was a really important point you brought up. For you, because you speak multiple languages, how does that influence your understanding and your use of ASL, having been exposed to English, having started with that as well? How does that influence your understanding or teaching of ASL to native English speakers?
Well, really, like I said, it's a visual gesture language.
Hmm.
That part of the language was so vital. And so being able to see it myself and pick it up, the concepts and all that, that just kind of influences it into the English language, where you can kind of modify and all that. ASL is very much, it doesn't have A and D and all that. You don't ever really use those. Um,
Hmm.
Words in the language. So the classifiers, like if you do this, like this is a desk, table, a cat is sitting on the table, you kind of show the cat just sitting on the table. You don't have to say the cat is. So those are, it's an example of it. And so all of that uh, plays a big part in that. Like the cat, what you want to do is show that that's a classifier and how they would sit on the table. That's kind of like, and you're getting the message across by putting the cat on the table. So, and that's the language that we use. It makes sense, if you see it visually,
Mhm.
and that way you can understand exactly what's being said.
And I hear a lot also because it's so visual, you also have to learn that body language, the positioning, not just the words, but also how you're delivering them, which is different from English.
Yes, it is very different than English because
Mhm.
in English you're using, the adjectives. In ASL, you're actually not using that. You're using classifiers instead. So the hand shapes play a part in that. For example, a hearing person might say, I'm very mad, or very happy. In ASL, you would do this, like you would say I'm mad, like you have different rates of being mad, like I'm mad or I'm really mad, like it depending on the intensity of how mad you are, or I'm really happy, or you want to emphasize it with your face, and that
Ah.
shows the emphasis.
So when you say classifier, you're referring to the facial expression or to the how you move your hand, the speed at which you move your hand or the intensity, that sort of thing?
Yeah, classifiers is kind of like a description
Mhm.
inside, like for example, like a person, like what they're doing, kind of the
Mhm.
vicinity of where it is, and
Yeah.
that is kind of what a classifier would be. Like a person, say they came over to me like this, they're coming to me, like, see, this is
Mhm.
a classifier where I just showed you how the person's coming to me. The cat sitting on the table, here's
Yeah.
the cat is a classifier. So
Yeah.
if if there's, let me give you another example. Say there's two people walking, you have two people and they're just walking across, you have the classifiers to indicate what you're referring to. You kind of add that, that is added to the content or the meaning of what you're trying to say.
Okay. I love that. So I'm already learning so much.
Me
And
too.
so just to deepen our understanding and our listeners' understanding, when you talk about fluency or proficiency in a visual gestural language, what does that actually look like, or what does that actually mean?
So the fluidity is kind of like the native language, like the fluidity of what's being understood, what's clear on what's being said, the speed, the accuracy. As deaf individuals, there's a speed of understanding the fluidity of what's being said. So some beginners, let's say,
Mhm.
when they're just now picking it up, and the later, as they pick it up later, maybe they add the vocabulary, they'll be able to be more fluid, with time, so to speak. So learning the classifiers, all the non-manual markers, the facial expressions. There's like 150 mouth morphemes on your face. Let me think of,
Wow.
Wow.
like, say a house. Okay, here's a house. You put a house here, like there's there's a couple of them. Ooh, and you do your mouth like this. It's like, ooh, they're so pretty. Like, ooh, and just your mouth is saying they're so pretty. Just, there's different things on your face that indicate what you're trying to. That's just an example.
Uh-huh.
Um, Oh, the mouth morphemes. This is the sign for mouth morphemes. I didn't even know that part. So this is an example of mouth morphemes to make sure deaf people understand the content of what is being said.
Okay.
And is that something also, I guess I'm curious because you talked about that idea of proficiency, not just in the words you can form, but understanding how the face and the gestures connect. Is that something also that connects to this idea of shaping meaning, both also the culture of understanding the full components of how meaning is made? Is a big part of, I imagine, visual and spatial and body language being a big part of deaf culture and communication beyond just learning the words and the gestures.
Yeah, right. We actually
Mhm.
tend to, it's like I said earlier, it's a 3D, it's a visual concept
Mhm.
most of the time. So you have a better understanding the visual concept of what's being said. You
Mhm.
can see it on your face. So yeah.
And is that something also does your family also sign? Is that something you've been able to kind of navigate with them?
Yeah, my family,
Mhm.
they're mostly they gesture to me.
Okay.
It's more like 2D. It they've signed to me along the way, and we kinda understand our own signs and can communicate in our own way.
Mhm.
So, right now, though, they're not here, they're actually, working out of town, so I don't see them every day.
Mhm.
Therefore, sometimes, you know, you lose a little bit of it, so
Yeah, I'm just so interested in this, that understanding not just learning how to sign, but the full 3D and what that meaning means.
Mhm.
Seems like another level of understanding the language and the communication.
Yes, it's different because English, like we said earlier, you're using verbatim the words,
Mhm.
grammatical order. In ASL, it's a 3D, it's a visual conceptual language. So, like, it's the same, like, it could, for run, it can be run and run. Like, it's 3D. Like, are you running or is it running water? That kind of thing. So,
Language proficiency isn't a single moment, it's a journey.
At Avant, we support the entire proficiency cycle, from learning to assessing real world language use to certifying skills that open doors beyond the classroom. Our connected platform gives educators clear data, less guesswork, and meaningful ways to recognize what learners can truly do with language.
If you're looking for a better way to support growth, from first practice to verified proficiency, visit avantlanguage.com.
Avant, the language proficiency company. That leads into kind of the heart of what we're trying to understand better in this podcast, which is multilingualism and multiliteracy, and what Marnina mentioned about making meaning, how we make meaning across text, right? And so obviously literacy is a different concept in sign language. So, what does literacy mean in a language that is not written in the traditional sense that we think about?
it's not a universal language.
Mhm.
So,
Ah.
because of that, it's depends on the regions. Like, so, um, you got the classifiers and what else? An OSV, which is uh, OSV, object, subject, verb, agreement,
Uh-huh.
is what that is. Yes, verb, agreement. Yes. Sorry. And then, so anyway, all that to say, people that use subject, verb, and object, they tend to use that differently than, say, you know, if you're trying to explain the exact, when you want to expand on what you're saying, you want to do the subject first, and then you want to do the verb, and then you do the object. So it's not an exact order that it would be in English. So sometimes it's kind of moved around, so to speak.
Well, that makes sense. And I'm wondering too, so we talk about literacy today as much more than just words on the page. So in a professional development that I was doing this weekend, we talked about reading an image. So I was having the teachers look at an image and talk about having your students brainstorm what they think, what they see in the image, and then turn and talk about what they think about that image, and then come up with questions about what they wonder about that image. And because the image was a picture of a French outdoor market with, all, you know, French bread, and cultural practices that they might see, I talked about that being an authentic text and having students walk through those thinking routines that push towards higher order thinking skills. So in that sense, ASL, obviously still opens doors to thinking through literacy because students could do a similar type of thinking and communication structure, right?
Right. Right. So we actually use that pathway to make sure that it's like a 3D conversation instead of the verb, like we said, the verbatim. It's kind of, it can be confusing, but understand the concept of what's being said
Uh-huh.
until you have the full concept. You got to have that 3D, that image of what you see, and then you can actually break it down. So it's more precise. It's hearing people tend to hear, you know, uh, it a certain way. We have to repeat it a couple times
Uh-huh.
culturally to be able to get the concept and understand what's being said.
Yeah. So I'm really just trying to better understand thinking about your childhood and your mom using the globe and the toy of the airplane. So you were, in a sense, you were reading these images, you were observing, you were watching, you were understanding, you were inferring, you were using all of these higher order thinking skills in order to be able to understand and communicate with your mom. So to me, in a sense, that's a type of literacy skill that led into the gesturing, that then led into, I would, if I'm just trying to understand it from a hearing perspective, because I can't understand it entirely from a non-hearing perspective, how you're then attaching meaning to actual words to then learn English and learn how to read and write English. So that meaning making process of attaching meaning to an actual word, how does that work? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So deaf individuals have the language, the foundation. So when they have that visual, they can actually figure all the details later. So the
Mhm.
words and the ing and all that stuff is developed later. If they're going to learn, the English language and developing, that skill. So they got to have the exposure, which if they don't have it, the English words, are like we said, grammatical orders, and you've got the pictures, and then tying them together. It's a language approach, and that's how I was, that's how I learned growing up. So that's part of picking up the concept of ASL.
And something I'm hearing about this, like it's taught differently than other languages. And we're in the age we talk a lot about AI and like language models and computer based and digital tools. And also the fact that those tools don't always replicate the cultural considerations. So I'm kind of curious when we think of learning ASL and how it's a process learned differently than other languages. What does AI look like with ASL? What do these digital tools, what are you seeing in a pattern with those as they're kind of coming into play in the language world?
I actually see that AI will struggle with complex content, which means the conceptual signs. Like it may be that, it's very basic signs. It's not complex, So, higher level thinking, if you will. So AI probably doesn't understand facial expressions, or, which are
Right.
important, the
Mhm.
mouth morphemes and all those things
Yeah.
that are important for ASL, interacting, with deaf people, the emotional connection with the deaf and, the individuals the human connection for communication that's so important for us as deaf individuals.
So you're seeing those weak points. Are you seeing any support or benefit to any of those tools, or is it not quite helping the community like it might be in other languages?
I don't really think that it would help because, like I said, I've had experience one time with AI, and AI was signing like every word, like verbatim,
Mm.
like the English language. And that's
Mm.
not always, I saw AI sign butterfly like this. Well, that concept the AI was signing was like butter flying. Well, that was not it at all. No, so, the actual concept, I don't think AI actually has the knowledge, if you will, to understand a higher level of competency.
And it also sounds like AI is not created to translate or to interpret in that way, because it is very much word for word or
Yeah.
structured as a language model to do language in a certain way. And ASL doesn't quite fit that box of how the language is structured according to what it's being
That is
trained
correct.
on.
That is correct. It may be that, it may be just very basic, if you will, on
Mhm.
the facial expressions, like I said, classifiers, mouth morphemes, all those things are missing.
Yeah, and you've mentioned several times how ASL is 3D, and while AI is getting there, it's not fully 3D yet, and even the avatars don't have that ability to make those fine motor skills and those very delicate facial expressions that sound so vital as a part of the fluency and the proficiency of a gestural language like sign language, if I'm understanding you.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yeah, we
Okay.
actually have full capability of including all of that in our conversations in ASL,
Mhm.
which are so vital too. So,
So something that keeps sticking out to me is when we talked about ASL not being a text-based language, how you mentioned that makes it not a universal language. And I understand too that various sign languages, they're regionally based, right? And so I guess I just wonder what are some of the pluses and maybe because I think that's got to be a strength, but I also wonder if that concerns you at all with the growth of AI and how these large language models are being trained. Does that pose a concern for representation at all for various regional languages?
yeah, it's possible. It's a challenge because AI, they only know one side of the story. The basic. They don't have the various different regions, the different countries that are involved. Like we had mentioned earlier, the grammatical syntax. So that's being missed. So that being said, AI, we want to make sure that the content, that the conversations that you're having with deaf people in the community and all, um, it's a challenge having AI because personally, we don't recommend AI because it's the human connection is lacking, and the deaf people feel uh, like they don't have much participation. There's no like a regular conversation like you would, and when you're face to face with someone, they crave that conversation. They want to be able to talk and have that human connection
Mhm.
for interacting. Oftentimes, deaf people don't have that at home.
Hmm.
So, having that interaction is so vital.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, I guess I'm just wondering out loud, what what suggestions could we have for those those engineers, those people that are trying to improve AI, or for those educators who are teaching ASL, ways that they can improve their practice, either one.
I think it's a good idea to have a deaf group of professionals that uh, instead of AI from the
Okay.
hearing the development of tools with creating AI are probably not from the deaf community. They're just kind of, if they got feedback from the deaf community, maybe that could improve their technology.
Mhm.
Maybe there were um, other places to, um, and I'm trying to think of the word for that. You said going through different avenues, or um, different ways of having the capability to develop something that would be necessary. Definitely
Mhm.
have their input for sure.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's really important because I want every language and every educator to be represented, and I worry about underrepresentation or misrepresentation of the language and the culture because culture is so deeply intertwined with language, and I don't want anyone to be left out. That's not okay.
But I do think it does emphasize something to me that's we've talked about before in this podcast, of this idea that AI can help with language, but it's missing that cultural element
Yeah.
and it's missing that human connection, that human communication. And I think a language like ASL that so centers in that full communication and context kind of almost brings to light some of those issues on a bigger scale.
Yeah.
So I guess that begs to question for me, my next question, related to this idea that I don't think it's existing in isolation. I think it's actually underscoring issues that we're seeing on a bigger scale, and it brings that to light. So I'm wondering, on a bigger scale, what can hearing educators learn from the deaf community about communication and access, about that importance of connection and being able to be a part of that?
So I think AI, knowing the cultural aspect of it in the community, AI wants to be able to have deaf people, and kind of knowing, um, flipping the light switch, let's just say, little bitty things that are so vital to that they don't have. So there's so much of that that's missing um,
Hmm.
text. So
And on a bigger scale, what can the hearing community learn from that understanding in terms of how we can better create that access, that communication, and keep that in mind with language? Because that seems to be so vital, not just to ASL, to language in general, but I think ASL really highlights how do we improve that access, improve that communication in our communities.
I think probably the being able to see the various types of, let's say, ASL, the languages, the 3D aspect of it, if they can actually um, see that there is a variety, that they're all very different, according to the regions, according to the people, that they're interacting with, that visual language approach is 3D. If they can understand that part of it, so often I feel like that like the grammatical syntax part of it, that's so important for knowing and learning through the process, so they can understand the language better.
Mhm. Excellent. Thank you for that. And so let me ask you, what is one thing in your educational journey that you're very proud of that you would like to share with our listeners today, that you would like for them to hear about?
I'm proud of the path that I've taken from the upbringing that I had, because I had no language and I just flourished. And I think the communication access was so vital, and I didn't know that it would be so important in my daily life here and now. So bridging the gap between the hearing people and the deaf people is so important. So I'm proud of that I'm able to implement that in my work.
Wow.
And it's
Okay.
so inspiring that you're able to do that. I'm wondering, when you think about like you're able to bridge that gap that existed for you, when you think of, I know you work a lot in deaf advocacy and trying to support that educational system for others coming through it, what do you see as the biggest issues that you're advocating for? Because I hear that what was missing for you, what would you hope to see for others?
I would want to see, I guess, the differences between cultures, the two different, just communicating that that hearing are one way, the deaf are that a certain way. Even deaf people have different variances as well. The society as a norm, just kind of putting them, bridging them together to have a better understanding of the two worlds would be my hope for
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
that
Well, I
want
think you've definitely helped us do that already here today. I certainly feel like I have a better understanding. And let me just ask you one final question. If our listeners remember one thing about ASL proficiency or deaf language rights, what should it be?
deaf rights. It should be communication access for individuals. Those who don't have communication, they can't even function in society without it, right? Communication
Mhm.
is so vital. It's key. So, because it's key, I think that if we could, in a perfect world, have them bridging together, deaf and hearing coming together and understanding the differences and bridging that gap, that would prevent a communication breakdown.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. That was very helpful and insightful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us today and for really shedding light on ASL and accessibility and understanding what that looks like. And I learned so much. I loved learning more about ASL beyond just the signs that we see. So thank you so, so much. And for our listeners and viewers, if you were intrigued by something in this episode and want to add to this conversation, be sure to comment below and remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast in your networks. Thank you so much.
Anytime. And I'm so glad that y'all are invited me here today. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
All opinions expressed in this podcast and the comments are solely those of the individual and not necessarily those of Avant.